Thank you very much, Secretary of State, setting the scene for today. More now, though, on that question of why Northern Ireland. If you're here today, perhaps it's your first visit to Northern Ireland, you're considering perhaps a number of locations in which to invest. Why this place? So, to hear directly from businesses who have already invested in Northern Ireland, please allow me to introduce the members of our first panel discussion for today. First of all, Lynn Rainey, a partner at PwC, who will chair the panel. Lynn is forensic partner, place and purpose leader for Northern Ireland at PwC UK. Her primary area of focus is leading a portfolio of projects which concentrate on regulatory reform that require the review, risk assessment and remediation of contracts for clients. Welcome to you all. We have Keith Farley, Senior Vice President and Director of Innovation and Customer Experience at AFLAC. We have Keith, sorry, before I go on to the next guest, I should say that Keith, although he now is based in the US, he spent quite a lot of time living and working here in Northern Ireland, and once you've done that, you definitely develop a special place in your heart for Northern Ireland. Kieran Hegarty is president of the Terex Corporation. Kieran was named president of Terex Materials Processing in March 2010, having previously held senior management positions within the group. We also have Dr. Robert Ladner, who is founder and CEO of CV6 Therapeutics. This is a drug development company dedicated to improving the lives of patients with cancer and inflammatory conditions. And then we also have Steve Harper, Executive Director at Invest Northern Ireland, Executive Director International at Invest Northern Ireland, the Economic Development Agency for Northern Ireland. So why Northern Ireland? Lynn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita, for the lovely welcome. Interesting listening to the Secretary of State talking, because I think for everybody who's sitting at the front today, we know what Northern Ireland can achieve, and we have so much faith and belief because we've been here and we've done it. And we really want to use this panel to bring to life the reasons why each of us as businesses have invested in Northern Ireland as I seek to chair it. Obviously, I'm a partner at PwC, and PwC is a globally recognised business. But Northern Ireland and why Northern Ireland was a question that we asked ourselves as well, certainly as a UK business. And I think for us, there was very early recognition that Northern Ireland was a place where our business could grow and where it was worth us investing. And we feel a bit like we've been trailblazing over the last number of years. And there is a uniqueness to our story. We have always been here. We're not a foreign direct investment story. But our creativity and connectivity has allowed us to create jobs for all, with support from InvestNI and, as the Secretary of State mentioned, our education providers as well in Northern Ireland, and really underlined how working with existing businesses can really reap rewards too. What it means in practical terms is that we have grown our business from around 700 staff in 2007, largely servicing local clients, to a business today with almost 4,000 staff servicing both nationally and internationally, as well as our local markets. So it has been quite a ride, I would say. But I think our success has been based on three key things. Creating an innovation centre that has radically transformed what we do and how we do it. Cementing Northern Ireland's place here as a connecting hub in a global ecosystem, connecting us with both nearshore and offshore. And thirdly, being creative about how we access talent. Understanding that we can also have a pull factor to Northern Ireland because of the type of jobs that we're creating, as well as actually creating supply and working very hard with some of our education providers to be able to find the people that we need to do the jobs that we need today and into the future. And this session is very much about bringing Northern Ireland's unique selling points to life with investors in technology, manufacturing, life and health sciences, and then we're going to round up with an insight in terms of the wealth of support that is available to investors coming in to Northern Ireland. You've heard the introductions from everybody across the panel today, but I'm going to start maybe with you, Keith, conscious that you've just returned from the US with your family after 4 years spent here establishing AFLAC in Northern Ireland. And for anybody who's on LinkedIn, you may have noticed his ode to Northern Ireland. If you haven't read Keith's ode to Northern Ireland, go and read it. Even I haven't visited all of the 32 counties in Ireland, so I feel somewhat chastened in many ways. But if you had to, I suppose, reflect back, what are the top 3 things, Keith, that made Northern Ireland the investment location for AFLAC?
That's a great question, Lynn. And first of all, it is wonderful to be back. We did live here for 4 years. About 60 days ago, we moved back to the U.S. And coming into Belfast last night was just a special feeling. It felt like a second home. So great to be back. I think the things that attracted us, number one, and you'll probably hear this from all the panelists, is the people. I would say the weather, but I'll say the people was number one. From the very first moment that we flew from Atlanta to London and then London to Belfast, and my seatmate would have been Suzanne Wiley, who was the chief executive of Belfast, of all people to sit by. That's the kind of planning that Invest Northern Ireland put into that, that she would be sitting right beside us with a fresh new brochure on why Northern Ireland and why Belfast. So I think from the very beginning, there was a connectivity, there was a warmth with the people. There's a story that some of you might have heard when we first came in 2016. My boss, his luggage didn't make it. And when I travel sort of like this, just in case. When he travels, he wears jeans and a T-shirt. And we had a meeting the next morning up at Stormont, and Virgil had no clothes to wear to the event since his luggage was lost. So we were staying at the Merchant Hotel, and they had suggested, well, it's 5:30 in the afternoon. You might be able to run down to Bogart on Ann Street and pick up a suit of some sort, but they're closing the shutter, so you need to move quickly. So we left the Merchant, went down towards Victoria Square, knocked on the shutter that was half closed. They opened it up, spent about 45 minutes with us in there. They had no idea who we were other than the fact that we were obviously American. By so many things they could tell about us coming in there and knocking on a shutter like we owned the place, open this door please for us. But they had no idea who we were meeting with or why we were there, that we were investors. They stayed with us. They found Virgil a suit, and then at the end, the trousers were too long. And the gentleman said, well, listen, I'll take these home tonight. There's someone down the lane from me that could hem these for you, and I'll have them back for you in the morning. We said, well, the problem is we have to leave at 7:30 to be at Stormont at 8. And he said, no problem, I'll be there at 7 at your hotel with these trousers. He had no idea who we were. And Virgil looked at me when we left, and he said, this is where we need to set up a place that focuses on technology and customer experience. If this is how a stranger would treat you, then this is where we want to be. So that was probably the first attraction for us, was the people. Then once we got here, the skill and the talent that we've seen, both from the students we have at Queen's and Ulster and even from some of the regional colleges, has been second to none. It's AFLAC's most accelerated program in terms of the technology that we do here. We do our most innovative and accelerated work here in Northern Ireland because of that talent. So it's great from that standpoint. And then probably the last thing, just wrapping up, is the ecosystem. The fact that you can reach out to the government, whether it's city government, whether it's regional government, even the national level, the universities, the fact that I'm sure Professor Ian Gray is here and Paul Bartholomew, the fact that you could know the folks that run the universities and be able to call on them and say, these are the skills that we need moving forward, I don't think you'd find that in a lot of other places.
Yeah, I think there is that statement, isn't it? People make the place, and I think you've described it very well with the Bogart story as well, and the access to education providers. I'm going to come to you, Kieran, because Terex is quite an interesting company in terms of just how it dominates globally from Northern Ireland. Do you want to give a bit of background on Terex and just how predominant your business is?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, Terex are a global designer and manufacturer of equipment that's used in anything from construction to mining, infrastructure. As a global manufacturer, we've strong manufacturing footprint in North America, in Mexico, strong manufacturing footprint across Europe, Italy, Germany, Poland, also strong manufacturing footprint in India, China, Australia, Malaysia. So we're a global player in terms of the products that we make. We sell our products globally. However, we've a significant presence here in Northern Ireland. We actually invested initially in Northern Ireland in 1999. For those of you familiar with Powerscreen PLC, was a company that was acquired by Terex back then. At the time, we had 3 locations. And again, as a global player, I always say, Terex have got lots of choices as to where to manufacture a product. And since we invested in Northern Ireland, we now have a total of 9 locations throughout Northern Ireland. Right across the north, right? manufacturing primarily crushing and screening products, right, which is what we're, at least in the Northern Ireland context, pretty well known for, brands like PowerScreen, brands like Finlay. But we've also expanded into adjacencies like wet processing equipment, and more recently opened a factory in Derry to manufacture environmental equipment. So again, probably similar to what you said in terms of the reasons Northern Ireland has been a very good place for us to invest, around the key areas, the people, the infrastructure, the talent that's available, whether it's in engineering, whether it's in finance. And not only that as well, and not just in terms of manufacturing, our corporation as well opened up a shared services centre where we do a lot of back office finance. We also run a lot of our IT services for the global corporation. We've a shared facilities, or shared business service facilities in Lurgan. So look, we've had a very good experience. And again, the growth that we've had in terms of expanding our footprint, I think is testament to our experience in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I think one of the little known facts maybe as well about your industry is that 40% of the world's mobile crushing and screening equipment is actually made here in Northern Ireland.
Correct. I often hear it's actually a higher amount, right? Or we'd like to think it was higher, but the reality is, from a mobile crushing and screening perspective, that our firm, under our brands PowerScreen and Finlay, plus other competitors to us, have really created a very solid cluster over many years, right? Where we're seen as world leading in terms of that particular industry. It's been a highly, been a growth-oriented industry over many years, and we're very proud of the position, not just we have, but in that industry, but the whole cluster, and the fact that not just Terex, but there's other leading Northern Ireland companies involved in that industry, and also, some of the multinationals have chosen to invest in Northern Ireland, again, because of that infrastructure.
Does the cluster act as a benefit for you in terms of accessing talent?
It's a double-edged sword, to be quite honest, right? In the sense that, there's clearly, and this is not just a Northern Ireland thing, I think it's a global thing. There's clearly, particularly in industries that are growing, there's clearly what we call a war for talent, right? And that's evident here as well, right? But look, the cluster has, in my opinion, got more benefits than it has negatives, right? Whilst sometimes our firms compete and we steal staff and we poach engineers from one firm to another firm, I think overall the infrastructure, the supply infrastructure, the relationships with the local colleges, both universities, not just the universities, also the technical colleges, and then there's bodies like relationships with InvestNI, some of the government bodies like MEGA, really help us with just bringing on talent. And so I think the cluster effect has got more positives than it has negatives.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. There is a bit of a theme emerging as well, certainly from Keith and Kieran, around product development, engineering excellence, doing new things, doing things differently. Bob, do you want to maybe give people a bit of an overview of what CV6 is doing? Very innovative business.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. And I represent, I think, the entrepreneurial side of what's going on in Belfast in the life science sector. So as you can hear from my voice, I'm from the United States. I actually was living on the beaches of Santa Monica and moved my entire group here, primarily because of Patrick Johnston. Now, I heard some moans on that. When you move from the beach of Santa Monica to Belfast and you get in a taxi, and the taxi driver looks at you and he asks the question, so you're a Yank, where are you from? I moved from the beaches of Santa Monica, now I live in Belfast. He'll turn around and say, no, why would you do that, right? And so let me tell you why. So first of all, it was a business decision. It's a strategic decision to move here. I'm a cancer researcher, lifelong. We moved senior staff of our group at the University of Southern California to Queen's University in Belfast. And the reasons why this really works is, number one, is the people. It's the talent. It's the highly skilled and innovative talent that we've been able to pull in. The end point of this I'll discuss in a second. The second, of course, is the support we got from a startup perspective. And that is Queen's University supporting startups from within, Secondly, it's Invest Northern Ireland. We've gotten 2 major research grants to drive our drug development process all the way through to first-in-human trials. And then lastly, for startups, it's really about capital efficiency. And this is one that's a big deal, especially in the world of cancer drug development or drug development in general and startups. The cash efficiency that we have here is unlike anything I've heard, at least in the United States. If I did this in Boston, not that I have anything against Boston, I love Boston, trained in Boston, but here I've been able to weather the storm, with COVID and other things that have happened. That capital efficiency really allowed us to be very resilient. And I think that talking to other CEOs of startups, that's a big deal. So I'm happy to say that this environment and the ecosystem of the life sciences has now permitted us to develop the first cancer drug developed in one of the first cancer drugs developed in Northern Ireland that we're putting into the clinic in the beginning of next year. And that is a big deal. That's a 1 in 20, 30-year event. And so I give an enormous credit to this ecosystem, to universities, et cetera, to allow us to achieve. So I'm saying that we're actually already at the footsteps of success here. We've already done it. We've proven the model. Now it's a matter of rinse, repeat, and bring in investment to allow us to scale. So that's the sensibility that I've had, and happy to talk about that more later to any of you.
Okay, and you're obviously, the proximity to Queen's is an important part of how you've been able to develop your business out here. Rob, do you want to explain a little bit about what that means practically?
Yeah, so within Queen's, which is unique, this is not normal in the United States in many institutions. It certainly wasn't at USC. We literally have our academic group, which is 50% of my time, with graduate students learning about medicine, et cetera, right next to the company. And so they cross back and forth for a semester or two, so they learn about what's going on in startup companies and finish their PhDs. So that sort of very rich environment is something that really drives, the next generation of our hires and perhaps those of other companies that are spinning in the drug development space. So I think that that's a very entrepreneurial stance, and indeed Queen's is well known for its entrepreneurialism. But we live it every day, and it's not something that I've experienced at the same level in the United States.
Okay, and you're actually exhibiting as well today, so if people want to learn a little bit more about what your business is doing, you're actually...
We'll be at the Queen's stand if you want to hear a little bit more about what we've got or any advice to new startup CEOs.
Yeah. I mean, Keith, you've obviously been listening to what everybody is saying. Aflac has now got a really solid base here in Belfast. What next for Aflac, and what is it about Northern Ireland that means Northern Ireland continues to be the place that you want to be?
Yeah, so we have grown now from 0 4 years ago. Actually, our very first employee, Mark McCormick, is here in the audience today. So he was our first, and now we have 150 employees. And Mark is now the managing director, and so he is leading the team forward. The next opportunity, I think, for Aflac Northern Ireland, because if you don't know, Aflac is a Fortune 500 company in the U.S. that sells a type of health insurance in the U.S. and Japan. And so I think the next opportunity is for us to expand the types of work that we're doing. There's a visit that we have with our Japanese CIO coming over in a few weeks to visit. Now Japan wants to know what we're doing in Northern Ireland because they've seen the success that we've delivered to the U.S. company. So I think that as we look at what the expansion opportunities are for us, it's getting to Aflac's second customer and largest customer, which is Aflac Japan, as well as what other things are we doing in the U.S. that we could use our Northern Ireland team for, because they look at things completely different than we would in the U.S. They are unfamiliar with the brand, unfamiliar with supplemental health insurance, because here we have the NHS. So they take a completely different view. And personally, now that I'm running a large part of that U.S. business, I want our Northern Irish team in every part of everything I'm doing to see how can we do it better, because they've proven that they can take and re-engineer things in a way that we never would have thought of.
Okay, so the innovation piece runs right through this as well.
That's it, and that was a big attraction for us. I mean, when you look at Belfast, and we heard about it from what we heard earlier with the speakers, the history of engineering, of innovation, the world-famous things that were done here right in this harbor, the shipbuilding capital of the world, the rope-making capital, the linen capital of the world, and none of those things are done in any great measure now Now it's about world-class cybersecurity, film studios, fintech, life sciences. So this is a country that continues to redevelop itself to what the world needs now, because what the world doesn't need now is tons of rope or tons of linen or tons of ships. What we do need are these other new technologies that are coming out of here. So I think the adaptability of this place is somewhere that is a huge attraction for us as well.
Okay. And Kieran, just from your side, obviously you've highlighted how long Terex has been here, 25 years. What does the future look like for Terex?
Well, again, as I said, what we primarily are known for in a Northern Ireland context is mobile crushing and screening. For those of you who don't know crushing and screening, it basically, I know the simplistic terms, it crushes big rock into little rock, right? But again, everything, the buildings that we sit in, the roads you drive on, all have to come from crushed rock. So it's an integral part of of expansion of infrastructure across the globe. But there's adjacent industries, and whilst we've been well known for the processing of minerals and rock, whether it's wet processing, dry processing, we're also moving into the circular economy more and more. And not just that, a lot of the resources, for example, natural sand is very hard to come by. We make machines now that will recycle, so when you demolish a building, you recycle the material and you can use it again. So we're pretty much, we believe, at the forefront of that sort of circular economy, as it relates to construction. So we're moving into adjacencies. Terex making a big play on adjacencies and also using similar technologies, which is important given the closeness, I suppose, in terms of the processing technologies to other forms of material like solid waste, etc. So that was the reason for the expansion of our Campsie facility up in Derry. But again, and look, the world's adopting more and more greener practices, right? So we think there's lots of runway ahead of us to expand into adjacencies and really build on that infrastructure that we have here. So I think there's lots of runway.
Okay. And just from your side, Rob, what does the future look like for your business?
So we are, as I said, entering our first in-human clinical trial first in Belfast. Then another big thing that helps support Belfast and our reputation and Northern Ireland in general is this clinical trial is going to be done throughout what we call the experimental cancer medicine centers throughout the UK. So we'll have patients here in Belfast first, then in Glasgow, Newcastle, and at the Royal Marsden in London. And so we're integrating all of the expertise within the UK and focusing them on what we're doing in Northern Ireland. So our next step is to expand after we prove safety and a recommended dose of our new cancer drug that has very broad action across multiple cancer diseases. And we need to raise some more capital to expand on that for about another, say, 50 to 150 patients to prove that it's actually working, and then we look for partners to go from there. But one thing I want to mention, if you don't mind me taking 2 seconds, there's a practical element to bringing people halfway across the world and sticking them in Northern Ireland. So this is the human component. Everybody that I brought has stayed. That's number one. Their kids are happy. I got 3 hours a day back every day because I don't have to sit on the 10 freeway in Los Angeles. That matters to me, right? Everybody's been able to buy a home. And so we have access to the greater European environment. So I think that's one of the elements that, Keith, you were sort of alluding to that adds to people's general happiness and performance. And they like living here. And I think that that's another key element that we haven't talked about that Northern Ireland certainly provides, at least in my opinion. I've been here for 8 years and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking last night, and leaving here is very difficult. If you haven't left here, it's very difficult. And so I think when you do invest here and you bring people, there's a stickiness to the place that it makes you want to stay and continue. I'm jealous when you said you burned the boats. I said, man, I should have done that. I kept the boat, but I should have burned it so that there was no option to go back. So yeah, it is a sticky place.
Yeah. And it's a lovely way, I think, to summarise how most of you feel about this. I mean, Kieran's obviously built his career here as I have. You've both come to Northern Ireland and built very successful careers and very successful businesses. And the stickiness of the place is definitely evident to me. Conscious, Steve, you've been sitting down the end, and I don't want people to think you're just here to make up the numbers. So, each person on this panel has talked this morning about the supportive ecosystem that is in place and what working and living in Northern Ireland looks like, and why Northern Ireland has worked for them. Could you maybe cover off quickly what support looks like for investors?
Yeah, I can. But just before I do that, I'm a returner to Northern Ireland, so I lived in Asia for 6 years. And the stickiness is what brought me back. It's fantastic to live in cities like Singapore and Tokyo, but there's something about Northern Ireland that is very, very special to us from Northern Ireland. And actually, when you hear it from two new citizens of Northern Ireland, it means a lot to us from Northern Ireland. So I guess from that perspective, I firmly agree with that. For new investors coming to Northern Ireland, I guess you're spoiled for choice in terms of organisations to support. So there's Department for Business and Trade, there's ourselves, and there's the Office for Investment. So particularly with around Invest Northern Ireland support, we really do that in 3 ways. So support before you get here, other than making sure Suzanne Wiley's sitting beside Keith on the flight to here. But we do that by creating a bespoke visit programme for every company. So it's not just a general, here's Northern Ireland, it's actually what is it that you want to try and achieve, and we set up that visit programme for companies. We seek companies like Aflac and Terex and CV6 to tell the story of Northern Ireland, because it's better they hear it from people who've done that and establish the track record of what's in Northern Ireland. And we also then will show them the property and everything that they may need, introductions to talent, introduction to the universities, and just really try and make that as seamless as possible. Then if they decide to come, we've got a whole host of incentives for them to do that. Like Northern Ireland does bring automatically a lot of value. Operating costs here are 40% less than some other Western European countries. Indeed, many more savings are to be had if you compare to Western European cities, those major ones. But we do have financial incentives to help companies. They can range from capital support, they can range from employment grants, and again, those will be tailored to what it is that the company's trying to look for, but also what are we in Northern Ireland looking to achieve from that company too. So we may give more incentives for companies to go to certain areas of Northern Ireland, or to hire from certain pools of talent, or to, as to Kieran's point, there is a global war for talent, so we want to incentivize companies to keep supplying that talent and either bring people into Northern Ireland, bring people back to Northern Ireland, but really keep that talent pool growing. We then will work with companies in terms of their skills development, very much focused on making sure that Northern Ireland can provide the skills that companies need and to help them drive their productivity on that. Then once they're here and settled, we don't just sort of wave goodbye and see you later. It's very much about trying to partner with the company and trying to make sure that we drive as much innovation happening in Northern Ireland. So for example, we will financially grant incentivize, as Kieran talked about, research and development here. And with our support and with wider UK government support and some of the tax reliefs, for every £1 a company spends on research and development, it can only cost them 41p in Northern Ireland. And that's a phenomenal saving. And that keeps that innovation ecosystem coming here. So there's lots and lots of support. We're not just about the money. Yes, it does help. Of course it does. But we like to think, and certainly in Invest Northern Ireland, we're much broader than that, and that we're a partner with the companies to go on and expand.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. We've been trying in this panel to get across, I guess, a sense of the excitement and just what can be achieved in Northern Ireland. And we do have some time for Q&A, but I'm just wondering if any of the panelists have anything they want to say now before I open up to questions. Anything you feel has been left on the table?
I have one, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Just one comment about the talent here in Northern Ireland. Carl Mulligan is the COO of CV6. I met him here. He was an entrepreneur before I ever got here. This entrepreneurial spirit, et cetera, has been here for a long time. So this is nothing new. The other piece is I've been teaching at Rutgers University and the University of Southern California in medical school for the last 25, 30 years. And in speaking to the students at Queens, I'm always having to say, listen, you're just as good as anything I've ever seen before, right? And I think that that's something that we need to foster. I mean, these are smart kids that are really eager to see good things happen. And I'm oftentimes saying to them, no, you might think that California is the greatest thing in the world and USC is a great university, but this is just as good, if not better in some ways. So I just wanted to bring that point up for discussion to see if you would agree on what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think sometimes Northern Ireland lacks a confidence issue, but it's charming because you don't know how good you are. And if you did, you probably wouldn't be a whole lot of fun to hang out with, you know. And nobody would want to visit. So, but I do think that there is a confidence issue, and maybe it's because of the past, and maybe it's because of this, but the reality is some of the best talent in the world sits here. And they don't know it, which again brings the charm, but you can see it. You know, when we did things like we taught a new technology that was external to AFLAC, it was a technology called PEGA, and we went through the classes in Northern Ireland and took a test, and we went through the classes in the US and took a test. The US had a 60% pass rate the first time, and the Northern Irish team had a 100% pass rate. And it was things like that. And that was black and white. It was a standardized test, and that was folks from all over the US. So I do think that there is a ton of talent here from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it's an interesting piece about confidence, because I have that challenge coming back sometimes around actually there's a level of humility, I think, that sits in Northern Ireland, which may be part of the charm. I'm not sure. Steve?
Yeah, I guess the point I wanted to make was, you know, I moved back 20 years ago, and Kieran was my boss when I moved back all those years ago.
Terrible.
But, you know, I guess reflecting, I was chatting to someone about this last night, the Northern Ireland of 20 years ago, okay, so we're 25 years into the Good Friday Agreement, but 20 years ago compared to now, which building my career here, the ambition that people openly will talk about now wasn't there 20 years ago. And I think that's phenomenal. And you see, you know, young people on stage, that we saw Emma this morning talking about that. That didn't happen 20 years ago. And, you know, that's down to a lot of foreign direct investments come into Northern Ireland, but it's also down to the indigenous business in Northern Ireland getting out and going global. And we can really see that talent start to come through.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think another factor that I say applicable to our industry, we make, you know, in Northern Ireland, primarily heavy machinery, but also, you know, we provide services with that. But our actual geography is very important, right? In the sense that, you know, 98% of what we make here, we export. You know, the island of Ireland in itself, so relative to our products, is a relatively small market, you know, correlates with population, etc. So it's a small market. So everything we do is about export. And I in terms of, you know, we can get a large crushing machine out of our factory in Dungannon to East Coast United States in 6 days, right? If we manufacture in our plant in Iowa, we probably couldn't get it to the East Coast of the US in 6 days by truck. So our geography and the ability to go into Europe relatively quickly, and the infrastructure from export, and at least from a product point of view, is really important for us, and it's a real advantage in terms of that centre. I like to think I know everybody looks at their country and say that when they look at the
middle
map,
of the world.
that's the centre of the world, right? But, you know, in terms of our markets going this way to North America and to Europe and Asia, we really are in a good geographic location.
Yeah, and I do think there is that certainly a central hub for global. Conscious that we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm conscious that there are people here who may want to ask some questions of the panel, maybe more challenging ones than I've asked. But if anybody wants to ask a question, if you put your hand up, just wait until the mic comes to you, please. It's on its way. It's the lady in the green jacket.
Hi, my name is Roisin Malloy. I'm from Trimedica. We're a medical device company based here in Belfast. So just on what you were discussing just now about the confidence thing, you know, we're a startup company here in Northern Ireland, and early days going out for investors in Northern Ireland. We're saying, okay, we want 2 million. They're like, what? 2 million? For what? And then we went to Boston on a trip with Catalyst. And they said, what do you want? And we said, we're looking for 2 million. 2 million? I wouldn't get out of bed for 2 million. So just with that said, you know, with the whole investor summit here, you know, how is America or other investors looking at companies in Northern Ireland, and, you know, what can we do to sort of level that off? Because there is this, when on startup, and maybe Bob, you'll know that, I don't know if you've seen any of this with local investors, you know, it's their confidence in us as well is our confidence in what we can do, and what can we do to change that or make it better?
Yeah, sure. I certainly experienced this myself. You know, how do you have to sell Northern Ireland and capital efficiency, et cetera. Oftentimes, the investors that I've interacted with want a big vision. They want you to dream no small dream, right? And so you have to project that and provide them with a start to end scenario. But you know, I'm not a professional investor. I don't understand how they perceive Northern Irish companies other than my own. But I think that if I were to say something about the companies I have interacted with is, you know, as you said, they want to write checks for $10 to $15 million, have a plan for $10 to $15 million. Don't be shy about it, and make sure it's comprehensive and it's a very clear path from, you know, initial investment to return. I, like yourself, did things sometimes $1 million at a time, $5 million at a time, and I think that we're all good enough to do it a different way, especially with the cash efficiency here in Northern Ireland. They're getting a good deal. Keith, you probably have something to say about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it goes back to even just some of the language that is used here. I think it's just a different perspective. So we'll have a team that'll create something. One of the examples is they created an AI that can process claims, medical claims, in seconds that used to take people going through manuals to do. And if you ask the team about this technology and you say, you know, how happy are you with it? They'll say it's not bad. It's all right. It's saving like $20 million a year. It's all right. It's not bad. And so, whereas in the US, if we found something that would save $100 a year, we would say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So there's that perspective that I found, even in the language that's used. Things are just understated. We don't get too excited here. You know, let's just keep it in perspective. But I think that as you're going out and asking investors, especially if they're American investors, which would be the only ones I could speak to, which I am not one of, right, because I'm with a large company. But it's that language that you use is sometimes we might from here undersell things, and then people can't see the true opportunity just because of the language, and knowing that the U.S. will overinflate things and the Northern Irish will underinflate things. So you have to find that equilibrium somewhere.
Yeah, it's a very interesting observation, just in terms of even the language that's used here. Yeah.
We spent a lot of time on language here. There was a lot of misunderstanding in the beginning where I thought something meant one thing and learned it did not.
It largely means the complete opposite, Keith. Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
Any other questions from the floor? Just conscious there may be some people who might want to ask a question. Don't be shy. Just looking to see if I can see any hands up. There's a hand up over here. Just get a microphone across. Thank you.
Good morning. Stephen Kelly from Manufacturing Northern Ireland. Keith, we make the best sliced bread. Ashley as well, if you haven't had the nutty crust. You probably miss it, Ashley. Kieran, I just wanted to just reflect on something, or if you could reflect on something for us. Obviously, the UK decided to Brexit. That had specific issues and implications potentially for Northern Ireland. Your business is in the border region, but we've ended up with a specific status in this part of the world. How important was that? The first part of the question. And secondly, are Terex able to capitalize from it?
Yeah, well, look, I suppose, and again, I assume this was a similar experience to everybody. When the 2016 Brexit referendum result came out, it was a surprise, right? I don't believe anyone expected it would go the way they did, right? But it was what it was. And really, I mean, if I look back at the Brexit situation from 2016 through really getting certainty, right, around the Windsor framework, there was a lot of uncertainty. Is it going to be a hard Brexit? Going to be a soft Brexit? Going to be, and I'm talking from a trading perspective, right? Because like a lot of our board would say to me, like if I go to them and say, look, I want to expand in this product line, they go, well, do you really want to do it until the whole Brexit thing gets sorted out? Is there going to be tariffs? Not going to be tariffs? And of course, I'm like, yeah, don't worry, it'll be fine, don't worry, they'll figure it out. But it was, in reality, an uncertain period. And so, I mean, the reality is when, and hopefully this is it now settled, right? Because business, at least our business, I'm sure it's the same for everybody else, we like certainty. And so now if we're certain and we know where we are, that's number one, a good thing. In terms of the benefit, of course, it has real benefits for us, right? From the fact that we can trade with Europe. I mean, 40% of our trading is with other EU countries, right? So that's absolutely very, very important to us, right? And the fact that it's zero tariffs, both to the UK market, to the EU market, that's been, in my opinion, a real strong benefit to us, right? But the key for us is just certainty, and that there's no more debate or not debate, or that's the key for us in terms of making future investment decisions. So hopefully that answered your question.
Right, thank you. Good question on the Windsor framework, so thank you for that. I think we are at time here, so just on behalf of the panel, thank you to Keith, Bob, Kieran and Steve for their time today. Hopefully it's given you a flavour of why Northern Ireland and helped to set the tone for what follows today. So thank you each for your contributions and time today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.